I'm working at this scrappy startup, and there's a new opening on my team for a junior engineer. So I tell my friend, go ahead and apply for this position. But then the hiring manager rejects him because she says his resume doesn't match the job description. And so I go fetch his resume out of the trash bin and I insist on her giving him a phone screening. And so he passes the first round, but then they send him the wrong project assignment and he fails miserably. So I'm embarrassed. But then when I reach out to him and I realize that there's this mix up, then I'm just like furious because I need to follow up with the recruiter, get him the right project sent over, and then ask him to please complete this second version of the project. And then we bring him in for an in person interview. He's crushing it, lands the job. And it all reminds me of how a resume can open doors, but it can also slam them shut. It's just one piece of the puzzle, and it's never the whole story. My name is Mike Roberts, and I've been helping people get jobs in the tech industry for the better part of a decade now. And I've helped lots of people navigate the job search process. One of the most important steps in that process is having a good resume. The resume is going to serve as your career snapshot. It's like a summary of all of the work and all the experience in one place that you can give out as a business card. It's going to be a place where you're going to want to nail your individual skill sets and try and align them to what the job description is asking for. And the goal when you exchange your resume with somebody else is really to get to the next step. The idea is that the resume should be a way for them to get an interest sparked and they should want to have a conversation with you. Something that you can put out there that's going to attract people to get you to the next phase, which is usually a phone screening. Now, resume is one of the key ways that you can build your brand, but it's not the only way, and you're going to do it in conjunction with your GitHub, your LinkedIn, any website or portfolio that you have. And so it's really important that you think about how you create all those pieces and weave a cohesive story about why you're the best person for this particular role. Now, keep in mind, resume is one of those pieces that you keep updated frequently and you align with the other resources that I just talked about. So, as I mentioned, really important to like have it be consistent with what's on your other, mostly on LinkedIn. GitHub, you might have a little bit of your contact information, and then make sure you're keeping it like updated. You should be constantly updating and adding more relevant experience, adding more projects, making sure that as you're accomplishing things, if you're getting new certifications, you're adding those almost on a daily basis, especially to your LinkedIn. When I look at people's resumes, I don't necessarily expect the resume to be updated constantly, but instead the major links out to like your portfolio, your LinkedIn, all of those are going to be where you're. And then if you get a impressive certification, then again, you can start adding those to your resume. But the idea is that throughout the links to the other resources in your resume, you want to keep things like super scannable and easy for someone to immediately say, "Oh yeah, I want to have a second conversation with this person," and spark a deeper conversation. I'm going to pause here and ask, does anybody have any questions? I'm going to leave a good chunk of time towards the end, but I definitely want to make sure that this is interactive and that you guys are getting individual personalized attention if there are questions that you have. How many of you have a resume like available for you right now, like at your desk and able for you to see? Okay. So I see a couple hands up. Good. If you could, then do me a favor and with your resume, fold it in half like this so that you can only see the upper half of your resume. And then Kevin, I see your hand up. I'll have you come off mute in just a second. So while I'm having this conversation, I want you to fold your resume in half. And here's why. Because when I review a resume, if in this what I would call above the fold section, there's nothing that stands out that aligns with the position that I'm looking to hire for, I'm immediately going to discard it and put it into the no pass at this point. If there's something above the fold that's interesting, I'll probably read the rest of the first page and maybe scan if there's multiple pages, and then they move on. So you can immediately keep yourself from being in that chuck it bucket by making sure that first top half of it has got the most interesting and relevant parts, the things that you think are going to be most relevant for the position that you're applying for. Kevin, you had your hand up. Feel free to unmute and ask whatever questions you have.
Yeah, hey, I appreciate you to sharing your time and guiding us through this resume piece. So my question is, what do you prefer seeing in a resume, right? Regarding pages, do you want a single page, 2 pages, right? Any white space in there, right? What order would you like to
Yeah,
see? Do you want colors? Do you want black and white kind of thing? If you don't mind sharing that with
sure.
us.
Great question. So I'll answer high level right now, and then a lot of that I'll also cover a little bit later as well. So number of pages doesn't matter as long as it's reasonable. I was part of a grant and I had somebody that was like a PhD at a college include a 25-page resume inside of our grant proposal. I was like, okay, you just killed our grant proposal because no one's going to read your boring 25-page resume in the middle of our proposal. So thanks. So you don't want to be on that end of the spectrum, but you shouldn't worry about whether it's 2 pages or 1 page or 3 pages. If it's relevant, keep it on there. If it's not relevant, meaning like it hasn't been part of your work experience in the last 10 years, probably not worth it for again, this like above the fold focus. And then getting beyond above the fold, getting to the rest of the resume, again, you just want to make sure like you can keep me interested. You want to attract and maintain my attention for the 60 seconds you're probably going to have as I'm quickly reviewing your resumes and separating them out. In terms of color, same thing. If you are going to be going after a front end position where it's you want to have a really good fit and finish and eye for user experience and the UI, then you definitely want to make it look nice. You want to, think about the fonts that you're using, font sizes, etc. But for everybody else, if you're not going after a front end UI position, don't need to include any color in it. Black and white's perfectly fine. You can use a surf or a sans serif. So that's like the one with the extra things on each letter or the plain one. Again, doesn't matter. As long as you're not using Comic Sans Serif as your font, you're probably going to be okay, right? So if you want to just use New Times Roman or Helvetica, something that's like Arial or like super plain, and just make it, I like to keep it like just two font weights and sizes, right? So you might have like your bold one that's maybe a little bit larger for your H1, your headings, and then you want to use just another regular plain one for all the rest of the text in it. And it's not, to me, it's not about it like having to look attractive. It's for me, it's more about can I get to the information quickly? So if you make it easy with just like a couple of fonts and no pictures, so even if you're doing a design one, no pictures of yourself, that's just not a practice here in the US. It also is just it makes it more challenging to like as a HR professional to not have it come across as like bias or discrimination. So just don't include pictures at all. If you want to highlight your service, for most companies, they really appreciate the opportunity to talk to veterans and, if possible, to hire veterans. So that can be like strategic and helpful for you. So if you wanted to have a colored logo of the Navy or the Marine Corps, something like that's perfectly fine. So I don't want to say you can't use color, but I would say in general, it's not going to be a big differentiator. I think those are the some of the main ones that you asked about. I'm going to cover a whole bunch of the other ones I think that you talked about. Why don't you, as we get to the end, if I haven't covered one of the additional ones that you have, just remind me and I'll go back through and we'll cover those too.
Hey, you answered it all. Appreciate it.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to continue on in the presentation. And again, it's a little weird because I got to keep figuring out what screens are being shared, etc. But can you guys see my slides again? You have to give me a thumbs up because now I can't see your faces or an audio.
Yes, we can see them.
Yep,
Okay.
we can see everything, Mike.
Okay, we've covered the basic overview. We've talked a little bit about like it opening up like the opportunity for you and being that like business card that you're going to hand out for folks. So the actual structure is the next thing that I want to talk about. So at the very top of the resume is usually where right in the, like the header section, I'll suggest that folks put everything that you need for them to contact you, but do not put your street address. You can put like a city and a state, but don't put your actual street address. Again, for the same reason, you wouldn't want an HR professional to feel like you're giving too much information about where you specifically live, and there might be something about that neighborhood or something that, again, is not a red flag against you, but it's just like it's too much information, like you're sharing too much. So I usually include a phone number. Pro tip for you is use a burner number. And what I mean by that is go get like a Google phone number or get another number that you can forward to your regular number, and don't put your actual cell phone number on your resume. And here's why. Because as soon as you get a job, you want the calls to stop. You don't want to be on the job at your new spot and like your phone just keeps blowing up because recruiters got your number and it's all over the internet now and everyone's trying to like call and get a hold of you. It seems weird, but as you get more experience and the longer you are, your number will stay out there on the internet and you'll just keep getting bombarded by recruiters. And so it's worse than spam calls. When you're in the mode to find another job and you're in a search, it's great, but you want to be able to turn it off. There was a time where I was like on the job and the recruiter called me about the person I was standing next to, and he was like, was it standing desks? I was like, yeah, I work with Aaron. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. Would you be able to give me his contact information so I can contact him? And I'm like, no, I'm not giving you the phone number for my coworker so you can try and poach them from the company that we work at. So that's why you don't want to have your number just like floating around out there after the search. Use a burner number. That's the pro tip. So you want all the information for them to reach out to you. So the email and a burner number would be like the most vital information to have at the top. If you want, you don't have to do this. Again, you've got valuable real estate at the top of your resume. So you might decide that there's more valuable information than your goal statement. But if you while you want to use a goal statement in some cases, is really to figure out, okay, is my experience clear to someone in regards to what I'm going after now? You may have a lot of relevant or transferable experience, but not one-to-one experience for the role you're going after. And that's where the goal short statement can clarify that you are early career software professional looking to add value to a company that likes strong business solutions coded eloquently or whatever, right? You're going to come up with your goal admission statement. If you think it clarifies or if it can be a synopsis of experience that may not directly align with the role, you think it's a little bit of a stretch. If not, you don't have to include it. Like, I want to make sure that folks understand that everything's optional. And what you're trying to do is include your best skills, your relevant experiences, and content that you think is going to be, again, most attractive to the person. Think about you've got one shot for this hiring manager to do what you hope, which is like to just move you on to the next phase. That's what your resume is intended for, just to always continue to move you through the process, to get you the first phone screening, to get you the first interview, and then get you through if there's subsequent rounds of interviews. The good news is, in many cases, it's going to be a phone screening and an interview, and that's it. They're going to make an offer. There won't be like multiple rounds. But if there are multiple rounds, you just want your resume to be able to stand up through those multiple rounds, is going to keep getting passed to the person that's going to do the interview. And you just want it to be like a super easy read and make it very clear. This is what you want to do, and a strong opening that can make an immediate impact on that person. So, in order of preference of where you should position things, I think that was part of your question. You want to put your strongest evidence and support of like why you're the best fit at the very top of the resume, and then your weaker and weaker arguments go further and further down towards the bottom because they're going to get less attention. So you want to have all your weakest arguments at the bottom and your strongest arguments at the top. So what I would generally recommend is if you have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or a certificate that's relevant for these positions, even if they're not relevant, let me take that back. If you have a bachelor's degree, it's a strong signal whether it's in a relevant field or not. Bachelor's degree is still carries a lot of weight. So I almost always put those up at the very top as close as I can to like the goal statement. That's your gold standard in terms of what people are looking to like screen candidates by. So you've got your goal statement, you got your contact information, you got your strongest thing, which is usually like educational experience. And then I would, for the service members, military service is going to be next. And then you can start working through the rest of your work history, the rest of your skills, etc.
I just wanted to echo a question coming from the audience. This is from Lizzie. So she's asking, so they're accumulating these certifications, their CSAs, their CADs, CIS, ITSMs. Should those be shoved up to the top, to the very top, like under the contact information? Or would you say a little further under the on that intro statement?
I would rank formal education higher. I would rank military service higher, And then I would say that certifications would be like the cherry on top, but they're, I think, lower in importance, in my opinion, when I'm reading it. Because again, I really value, if you've been in the service, whatever your MOS is, you're going to have a lot of transferable skills. And those are going to be much stronger. And by the way, if they read through those things and then they see, and you're going after ServiceNow position, then they see you're certified in CAD and you've got your staff certification, then that's fine. They're going to be like, all right, checks that box too. But that's not going to get you a read of the rest of it. So yeah, you can put your certificates in there, and then if everything else is just, this is not, this doesn't look great, then it doesn't matter that you position the certificates higher. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
And as I mentioned before, quick scanning. You're only going to get a few minutes of the person's attention, so you want to make every one of those moments count. Okay, I generally think the strongest additional evidence that you can include on your resume is going to be real project work. So when you talk about, maybe they're not digital products or projects, but they could be initiatives that you're a part of, right? The areas where you can highlight and prioritize strongest experience using projects, using the skills that you've attained over your service, and then try to link the keywords together with those. So if you have an example of a project that you're part of or an important mission that you're a part of, and then below that is where you want to list, like when people want to list tags of, I have adaptability and I have experience with using Jira or GitHub. You want to tie those together with some relevant experience, and don't just have the word blob at the bottom of your resume that says like all of these little technologies that you work with. Try and keep them up and with their relevant projects, because it just ties it together and makes it more tangible. When I can see that you've used a project management tool and it was related to a project that you're working on, great. That's where you want to be able to, again, tie together and tell a story. You want to weave it into an actual, for me, a very quick scan. Okay, I know this person has done this thing, and this is how it could translate to this job. So once I get a good picture of what you're saying that you've done, I can then think about, okay, how would that fit in, or where are there potentials for that to help here? Again, brevity, clarity are going to be super helpful. Any questions about the storytelling aspect of it? And again, you can just come off of mute at this point because I can't see people's faces. Hang on. Okay. Any questions about anything I've covered so far?
Hey, Mike, appreciate you stepping in with us today. It's really great information. I think my question would really be, I'm hearing like the real project work, and that's like the bread and butter that I bring to the table is, hey, my experience. How do you do that without compartmentalizing them down like the list over time? Would you recommend taking, hey, a couple key hits and putting those up above the detailed breakout of, hey, worked at job X, Y, and Z? So pull those out of those frames and put them up top. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah. And there are various formulas. I won't get into them right now. On in this role, I did this and it created this. And so you do this like these XYZ fill in the blanks. I tend to be more of, I like to see them more organic, and they're more like in a form of almost like a story, mini story, a bullet pointed story. And so think about the beats of your career history, right? So if you had to go back, what are the last couple big things that you would tick off? And then maybe not go down the rabbit hole and go super deep on any one, but at least give a small snapshot or a window of what was this experience like and how does it shape the skills that you have and what you could apply to a similar scenario. I just want to be able to see that when I'm looking at your resume, okay, man, like this, dealing in this tough situation and having success here will translate to these kinds of business needs that we have. And so it's not so much about like I said, going super deep down the rabbit hole. It's really about giving that like summary and synopsis and taking away the big pieces and making them as tangible as possible. So the thing that I hate is like flowery, puffery language, right? The greatest ever. Everyone says that I'm a thought leader, right? And it's no, that's not helpful. What's helpful is to say that on this mission, I was able to execute within these parameters and we were able to have this successful outcome in a simple, like one liner. That to me holds a lot more weight than like the puffery around, I'm a fast learner, right? Great. Can you give me an example? And that example is then going to hold up and be a lot stronger. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think so. That's great. I appreciate it.
Got another question, Mike. Depot's got his hand up.
Yeah, I want to quickly understand what you mean by it should be started. So you're saying in time of experience, so instead of making it like a bullet point, it's better to make it like a story of what you've actually done, right?
So let me clarify. You still want to have it in bullet point format, but
Okay.
you want each sentence to be like a specific stat about here's the project that you did, here's where you started, this is what you accomplished, or here's the problem that you were given, here's how you approach the problem, this is the solution. But you still want to use bullet points for that. And then below that, you could include like the skills. If you want to list like a little a blob of like keywords and skills, you could put those below and tie it together in one little chunk of experience, if that makes
Oh,
sense.
all right.
Right.
Thank
So
thank
I
you.
wouldn't put it into a paragraph form where it like requires people to read through a paragraph because that's going to break the momentum you have when you're scanning things. Like when I'm scanning things, the last thing I want to see is like a book. And like I'm scanning, and now I've got this heavy paragraph, and like immediately my brain's gonna be like, okay, this is, I don't know if I want to keep going or not, right? Instead, if you use that bullet point format and you make them chunky but very quick and easy to read, that's going to be helpful.
Thank you.
Got another question, Mike. Got Daniel with his hand up.
Sure, go ahead.
Hey, Mike, thank you for being here. So, my question is, I've got a project that's not even in the tech related space, but I think it shows the potential for growth in a short period of time. I worked on a massive construction project where I didn't have any prior knowledge, but then at the end of it, I built a house. And so do you think that's worthwhile putting in there because it speaks more about my ability to pick up a skill and then be proficient?
Yeah, absolutely. That's an amazing story and one that I think would be enticing for me to, okay, I want to read about this. And then after I've read, like you went from no knowledge of building a house to like now you could build a house. I want to have a conversation. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to spark like, hey, I want to talk to this person and like figure out like if he's a good fit. It's almost like you're fishing. Like you want to have the most attractive lure so that when you cast it out there, you get someone and it doesn't necessarily need to align with the like specific, because I'm assuming that you're not going out for a job that's like building houses, right? And instead, you're telling this journey of like instead of telling me that you're a fast learner, you've shown that you're a fast learner because you were able to build a house in a short period of time. That's exactly what we're talking about when back to the previous question, we're thinking about like how do we frame the transferable skills? It's exactly like that. You want to have an interesting, compelling reason for them to be like, yo, I need to talk to this person. I just want to hear what the journey was like to build a house. So yeah, include all of those kinds of things. Those things are like super valuable.
Yes. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Not at the moment. Chat's clear, Mike.
Okay. So back to, okay, you guys can see my screen still?
Yep.
Okay, so we've talked about again creating that like clear narrative with like short summary type statements and bullet format that are like super easy to consume. Next up, keeping it congruent because the very first thing I'm going to do, like I said, 100% of the time when someone sends me a resume, especially if it's a digital one, is I'm going to start clicking on the links at the top and start opening up the other pages so that, okay, I get a certain distance down the resume. Now let me switch gears really quickly and look at their LinkedIn and look at their portfolio. So a couple things that, again, should just match. I don't want this to descend down into becoming a LinkedIn workshop, but you want to make sure the details are the same or as similar as possible, and there not be something that's going to call into question, like what one of these is different than the other. Which one should I believe? Which one is like the real you? This is where you do want to have a headshot. You don't want to use like an avatar or a logo or something else. It might make sense for you to go to, I know there's not Sears anymore, but there are definitely places where you can go and get like a quick headshot taken. But it's just as easy these days to hold up your cell phone if you've got an iPhone. If you got Android, I'm sorry for you. But if you got that iPhone, you do the selfie picture, and then you can drop it into something like Canva and do a cut out the background or just stand in front of a white wall, something that's like super basic. Get a clean selfie headshot, and then make sure you change the banner on LinkedIn because you in that case you do want it to just stand out from the rest. You don't want it to look like you just like half haphazardly threw together your portfolio, but you took a little bit of time to customize it. There's even some alternative banners that they'll let you select that they already have, so you don't even have to upload your own. You could just not use the standard one and instead pick the alternative one. Again, it can be used to share a little bit more of like your backstory, and help you stand out. That's one of the key things that you want your resume and your LinkedIn to do, which is you want to, as much as you can, separate yourself from the other candidates that are applying for the role. That differentiation is going to make it easier for you to get to the next step. Because again, if I'm looking at 100 resumes and I'm quickly trying to separate them out, anything that stands out is going to be like, okay, now you've shot your shot. You're either going to stand out in a positive way and I'm going to move you forward, or you're going to stand out in an immediate negative way and you're the fastest person I'm going to toss aside. You always want to stand out from the other 100 candidates. And resume, having a LinkedIn header, having a clean shot, all of those things are going to help create that distance. And that consistency builds trust. You want them to trust that you are, in fact, the candidate that you are portraying yourself as, so that you're not going to waste my time as an interviewer to get on a call and then start poking holes in what you've said that you are. So you want to be 100% genuine. People will often ask, is it okay to fabricate anything, or how bad is it to lie on a resume? I'd say it's terrible. So make sure everything is honest and nothing is even slightly misleading. Even if it's factual, but it's misleading, what it's going to do is create more of a challenge for me when I'm reviewing your resume, because what I want to understand is who are you? What is the real state of where you are in your development and your skills, so that I can make the right judgment of, if we bring this person in, I can get them where they need to be in 6 months. If you mislead me about where your experience is, now I'm like doubtful. Okay, I don't really know where this person's experience is, so I don't know if I can get them to where I need to during the onboarding process, and I have to pass on this candidate because it's just not clear to me, because they're not being transparent. They're like breaking my process. My process is, I want to know exactly where your skill level is when we're having this initial conversation, so that I can make the decision. Yeah, they have enough potential. They might not be exactly where I want them to be today, but they got the potential. So they're a good fit for this role, even if it means they're going to need a little bit more help, etc. So on your resume, you want things to be clear. You want me to get a good read of where you are. You want it to be as close to a thermometer as possible, and not this like a nebulous, like just shiny object that, oh, hire me, pick me. Instead, it should be like, this is what you're getting with me as a candidate. And then, in addition to this is what you get with me as a candidate, here's the reasons why I think I'm the best candidate and I'm better than the potential competition and I can do this particular job. So I got one more slide of things and then we'll open it up and I'll answer any additional questions. So we talked about this a little bit earlier on. You do not need to worry about length of the resume as long as it's not ridiculous, right? So if it's 1, 2, or 3 pages, doesn't matter. A lot of times with early career folks, not necessarily with service members, because you have a lot of work history. That's, even if it doesn't seem it's transferable, there are going to be some skills that are transferable. The folks that have less, folks that have maybe worked in maybe retail or fast food and are really early in career, like you're under 20 and you just haven't had a lot of work experience, then it makes sense that your resume is only going to be 1 page, and that's perfectly fine. You don't have to find ways to fluff it up, because in the end, that helps me to understand, okay, your early career, don't have a lot of experience. What have you done? How have you been successful? Is there any, am I seeing that you have a personality where you want to win? You will work super hard. What in your resume ticks those boxes for me, even if it's not long? So it's not about volume, it's about quality. And so really think about, be measured with the number of words that you need to use to communicate something. If you can communicate it in 7 words, amazing. If you can communicate it in 6, even better. If you can communicate in 5, man, that's, now you've saved me so much more time, because you've made it super easy for me to digest and get to a decision. So really think about that in terms of like overall number of pages that you need. Can you be brief and concise and communicate? It doesn't necessarily need to like You're not judged based on the number of characters and words, basically. Space is also can be helpful. So I think sometimes people want to cram everything into one page because someone's told them like a resume has to be one page. And so then you end up with a resume that looks super dense. And again, it looks almost like a book, like a paragraph, like one big meaty paragraph. Add enough space and enough breathing room, headings, bullet points, spread it out a little bit, even if it's now a page and a half or 2 pages. That's fine. Once you start going over 2 pages, now there's a chance you're going to lose a page, right? Because it's not front to back now, it's an extra page. So just be logical and reasonable about it. There's few people that I know have enough to warrant a 3 page resume. Most people could get it onto one page back to back. And if it's super dense on one page, you should really consider like adding some spacing, adding some white space to make it easy for people to digest it. You want it to feel like it's not a heavy read when they look at that like above the fold and then start progressing the rest of the way down the resume. Obviously, keep it focused. And so there are some schools of thought, and it's again just depends on the work effort you're willing to put into having multiple versions of your resume. Keep in mind though, with multiple versions of your resume, you're going to want to keep some of the sections the same so that your LinkedIn can always match your resume. And there will just be maybe a different goal statement. Maybe there's instead of all your certifications, you list some certifications on one version of the resume and some on another, right? But you definitely want to have the same work history. You don't want to have that inconsistent with your LinkedIn. So you could focus on having a couple resumes. A good example of this is when people are unsure if they want to go into a leadership role or if they want to be an individual contributor. And those are definitely two different resumes. So you're going to have one that you use when you target roles that are leadership positions. And then you're going to have another resume that you use when you target, hey, I just want to be a software engineer, or I just want to be working in cybersecurity on this particular type of team. So it becomes a little bit more work to make sure that your LinkedIn is consistent, but just make sure that there's nothing different about like your work history between the two. And obviously, it goes without saying that you want to use all your best stuff, and then you want to eliminate things that are going to be a distraction or aren't going to add, they're not high quality. Think about if you're a premium brand, like if you were a premium brand, what would your resume look like? And those are the things that you want to include. Okay, if you're watching this far, please do me a huge favor. Like and subscribe to this video. And more importantly, go check out hackingthejobsearch.com where you can get my book, Hacking the Job Search. And don't forget to join the community. So please, again, go to hackingthejobsearch.com if you're interested in going a little bit further into the rest of the job search process. Now back to resumes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can figure that out. Did I already stop sharing my screen? Nice.
Yep.
And open it up for more questions.
Got a question on behalf of Emmanuel. This question is, are cover letters important enough to add? I'm assuming he's saying if they're not asking for a cover letter, should we just go ahead and throw one on there and send that out?
Maybe. I often go for the low volume instead of a shotgun approach to job searching. You're going to maybe pick off 10 a week and apply for 10 positions a week and make them all super high quality. And so if you have that bandwidth and if it's not required, then sure, then you can include a cover letter. The thing with the cover letter is, and we could do a whole nother workshop on cover letters, maybe we will, is you want to use it to fill in the blanks and talk about things that like aren't really apparent when they look at your resume. It's an extra chance to make the pitch of like, why me? Like, why am I different? Why am I a good fit for this role? And it's not just a summary of your resume or a recitation of the same things that are on your resume. It really serves a different purpose. It's to warm the person up. And again, it's a different way of storytelling. It gives you like that first or second shot, depending if they read that or your resume first, catching their attention and getting them to want to have a conversation with you. Everything on your resume and your cover letter should be driving people to want to reach out and have a conversation with you, because it's much easier for you to sell your skill set when you're talking face to face with someone and you can see their reaction and you can go a little bit deeper and get more of a personal connection with someone. So these are designed to drive that part of the conversation. Your cover letters can be super different for each role, right? So again, when you're doing the research about the company that you're going to apply to, you're going to want to think about, okay, can I find out what their key initiatives are for this year or the last couple of years? Can I find out like what are some of the things that make this company unique in the market? Like, why should I apply for Northrop Grumman versus Boeing? What was Boeing working on today that's like different. And then in your cover letter, you can drop a few things like, hey, I know it's like super important right now for Boeing to do this. And I think I would be a great asset because while I was in the service, I was heavily focused on X, Y, and Z and can bring a lot of my skills to this role that you're looking to fill. And then that's more paragraph format. So now we're telling more of that like storytelling in a paragraph format and giving them again the extra things that you might not be able to easily share in your resume. Like, for example, if you've got a gap in employment, cover letter is a great place to just drop a one-liner about that gap in employment. Like, hey, I was out of the workforce because I got an injury and it took me a while to bounce back. Perfect. To cover that in the cover letter and then talk about how you are resilient and how you never let those kinds of challenges like keep you from success. Does that make sense? What else? What other questions do you have?
Hey, Mike, I did have a question. I'm trying to compartmentalize and digest everything you got going here. I know for me, one of the big struggles I run into is getting past the AI or the ATS systems and trying to get those keywords and jamming all that data in there that they want
Yep.
to make you stand out versus you're saying readability, tell your story.
Yep.
How do you do that without just leaving a lot out once it's just in the system for the bots to
Yeah.
schwack?
Especially these days where I think some people are trying to game the system on both sides. You've got companies that are trying to automate the process of screening resumes. You got individuals that are trying to like game the system by having like bots and agents apply for jobs for them or doing it at super high volumes. None of that stuff's going to work. Eventually, if it's not already happening, you're going to have bots talking to bots, and that's not a good scenario. So what I tend to think is like your resume shouldn't be a silver bullet. Back to what I was mentioning at the very beginning, like it's not going to be the thing that lands you the job, but also try not to think of it in a way where it's I gotta figure out how to game to get this in front of somebody. That should be the opposite. It should be instead of you thinking how you can push your resume out, you should be thinking about how can you create an opportunity for people to be desiring your resume and trying to pull your resume in. And the way you do that is by networking and having someone inside in the organization. So anytime you're reaching out to any organization and you're submitting your resume, you should be working on creating multiple internal champions, reaching out to people, networking with people that work inside of the company so that you don't have to leave it up to chance if your resume is going to actually get to a human being. Instead, you've got someone pulling for them. Because like I mentioned with the person earlier, that when they submitted their resume, it made it to the trash can. But then I was able to save it and pull it back out because I was like, hey, my buddy applied for this position and we haven't scheduled the first interview. Like, what's going on? So rather than thinking about like, how do I fix it for ATS, I would spend more of your time and energy in like, how do I network, find a connection of somebody, and then have a backup for if it doesn't make it through the ATS. Because it's like trying to engineer a solution against the ATS is you just have no chance of making it work for all of them. And it's gonna benefit you on multiple different. So I'll give you another reason why, like having an internal champion and submitting your resume and making sure that they know is that when someone inside of the company, at most companies, refers someone, the hiring managers give deference to that. And the hiring managers are like, listen, anybody that gets referred from someone, we at least give them a phone interview. And so that was the other argument I made to the HR person. I was just like, yo, this is a recommendation, a referral. Like, you guys should be giving a first interview. It doesn't matter what their resume looks like. It could be complete trash, but that's our policy. And if you think about it, if you want to incentivize your current employees to get their friends and like people that they know to come to the organization, you want to make sure that like you do the first interview because if you don't, I'm never going to refer more people because I'm just like, why should I waste time telling my friends to apply if you're not even going to interview them? So that kind of almost gets you a first interview if you know someone inside the organization and they refer you. But keep in mind, if you're reaching out and you're building internal champions inside of companies, it's a new relationship. You should not expect them to refer you, like to make a referral. That's a like a pretty high bar. At the least, they might not refer you, and that's like a technical thing. Like when they refer, usually there's a form they have to fill out, say, hey, I'm referring this person. You should expect to see their resume. So in the event that you can just build rapport with someone that's inside the organization, you might be able to check in with them later and be like, hey, I submitted an application a few weeks ago. Do you know by chance if there's any chance that someone's looked at it already? And what do you think are the odds that I might get to a phone screening? That kind of follow up. And they'll probably be like, oh yeah, let me go check and let me ping someone and see where it's at and see if they're gonna move forward with the next round. So a referral would be like, oh yeah, if I get you in and you stay for 60 days, I get a bonus. And they're incentivized in that case, like if they know somebody that's gonna be a good candidate and is gonna survive that whatever the waiting period is, they're gonna get a financial benefit out of it. They're gonna help someone that they know and trust. So there's all these additional benefits of that referral method. But at a minimum, if you're not getting like a strong referral, just having somebody inside that you can like tag in and be like, hey, any chance if they've looked at my resume or not, might save you from the anybody else. Don't be shy. This is your chance because you were gonna have to do resumes.
While they're thinking about questions, Mike, I got one that we usually get from our own SkillBridge participants, and this is in regards to certifications that are not, well, obviously, everyone here is going to be getting their ServiceNow certifications, but they've also accumulated certifications from the military, secret clearances. I guess you can put that in there too. Should they be adding those to these resumes if they're military certifications? And specifically for secret clearances, do we want to shove that down to the bottom, or would you recommend they highlight that also somewhere on the top? Since you said like the above the fold, secret clearances, I know have a lot of weight in the tech industry as well.
A security clearance is going to carry a lot of weight, especially for some roles where it's a requirement and they might not want to risk bringing somebody on that they know they can't get cleared. And so that could be like one way to stand above a lot of other applicants is if you already have that clearance. Now, some hiring managers are savvy and they know that if you're a veteran, and especially if you've like recently served, that they'll be able to do it. You don't necessarily have to do both. You don't have to at the top of your resume say that you're a veteran of the Navy and then also put your security clearance right by it. But you could, again, depending on your real estate. If you feel like your resume is thin, then yeah, include both, like veteran of the Marine and clearance previously held, whatever it is, or currently held if it's still active. But employers that are looking for that are savvy and they know what signals to look for, and they know if you've just transitioned, even if you don't currently hold it, you can get it reactivated fairly quickly. You don't necessarily need to go through all of it, but you can use the short little acronyms of the level of like top secret and all of those kinds of things. In terms of like keeping it up towards the top, yeah, I'd have some signal at the top of your resume above the fold that you have a security clearance because it definitely distinguishes you from a vast majority of the American population. Most folks are not going to have a clearance, and many might not be able to get one. Was there anything else in your question beyond security clearance that I'm missing?
It was so when they share the resumes with me, I see a lot of certificates in regards to school specifically for the Navy, or I'm trying to remember the other branches
Yeah,
that have
okay.
these. Yeah.
Got it. So if it's relevant, if you're a Navy diver and like you went to dive school and there's some kind of like certificates for that, unless that's what you want to do now, down towards the bottom, right? It's great that you have it and it shows like your toughness and but it doesn't apply to the job, so that's why I wouldn't put it above the fold. Security clearance for sure. Any tech or IT ones, if that's what you're wanting to go into, for sure, those can go up towards the top. But if they are ones that you think are just like not relevant to the role, then again, that's where you're going to start moving it further and further down on your resume. Industry recognized credentials are almost always going to be super valuable when you're looking for tech roles, right? So if you got like Cisco certified network associate, Microsoft certified systems engineer, anything like the ServiceNow certs, those will all be super valuable. If you're going to go into the ServiceNow ecosystem, if you're not going to go into the ServiceNow ecosystem, they may not be as valuable. But if you're in the cohort right now, my assumption is you're looking for that to be part of the work that you're going to do moving forward. So they'll be relevant, especially if you can get a big boy one or big girl. GRC, that's a big one, right? If you could get something like that, it's going to stand out for sure. When you eventually become certified master architects, throw that bad boy up there towards the top, right? Those are going to be, they're really distinguished. So they're helpful for sure.
Mike, we got another question from the crowd. This is from Sam. He says, "How much gap or break is acceptable between jobs on a resume?"
Any, as long as there's a plausible explanation as to why there's a huge gap. Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes it's because you're a caregiver or something else. What is more challenging is not a gap between one job and another is when there's like multiple gaps in between each jobs. That's a red flag, right? The second would be if there's every job has a short tenure. So every time I go, it's 6 months, 8 months, 1 year, 6 months, red flag. Now, if you have that and that's been your work history, that's where you want to start to use your cover letter to explain that I have been, persistent and diligent, but I've been working in industries that have had a lot of turnover and there's been just a lot of like organizations that are collapsing. And you can say, I went to work at this startup and the startup went under. It's not your fault that you're only there for 6 months. Or I've been doing contract work. And as each contract had ended, the agency I was working with didn't have new projects for me. Right. And so you had to move on and there were gaps because they didn't have a next contract for you. But you want to, as much as you can, as you enter the civilian sector, avoid scenarios like that. So when you're thinking about where you want to actually go, and that's an important part of this, like you're also trying to vet the organizations that you're going to work for so you don't end up in a situation where they bring you on for 3 months and then they have to let you go. And then you go to another organization and they have you there for 4 months. Now you start to look like you're just a job hopper and you're going from place to place. And you have to be able to explain that you're not just doing that to get an extra, like a bigger check. Because I know people that have done that. I know folks that they'll get a job, and as soon as they get a job, and this is unethical, and I do not prescribe this. I'm just telling you guys, I've seen people do this, and I don't think it's good. And that is they get a job, and then they immediately start looking for another job while they're at their first job. And then they just keep changing jobs if someone offers them even $1 more than they were making somewhere else. And it backfires super fast and super hard because I can read it when I look at a resume and I can tell this person's just job hopping and they're not going to spend any more time at my company than the time it takes them to get an offer at a higher rate. And then they're going to leave. And that's not a good person to pick for your organization. Other questions?
I have a weird one. I have a hard time just because I'm a military spouse, so my husband moves a lot. So that when we first get somewhere, I spend the first year doing a job that probably isn't as the greatest job. But then after a year, I figure it out. I find my niche and I look for something in digital solutions. And then I spend the next year and a half in that really good job. And then it starts all over again because it
Mhm.
continues in that cycle. And then obviously there's gaps, but military spouse is not a job. I can't say, oh, how do I explain that? Like, how do I
In
explain
your
that?
cover, so throw it in your cover letter and just say, I'm a military spouse. We move around a lot. And as soon as you say that, I'm like, okay, cool. Now I understand. It all makes sense to me.
I fear that if I put that, they're going to be scared that I'm moving again and I'm not going to have that long tenure. So now
Sure.
they're not
But
gonna.
the way I look at that is that that's the transparency that you need with an organization to be able to like because you are making a promise to the person when they hire you, and it's an implicit promise, which is I'm coming to work for you, and I'm coming to work for you until it doesn't make sense for us to both work together anymore. I think when you try and hide or obfuscate that, it only makes me question why have you only been there for a year in between these other positions. So I feel like it's easier for you to justify it and explain it than it is for you to fear that if you explain it, they're going to worry you're not going to be around. Because the reality is like that's going to happen if you get stationed somewhere else. Or you could say like, we've now settled down. My husband is out of the military or my spouse is out of the military. And I think transparency with as much as it makes sense and is reasonable is helpful. You don't want to go into too many like details about like family and all those kinds of things because it gives off signals of, okay, again, there could be HR issues involved with this. But if you know that you're now settled, you're going to be there for the long term, great. The other thing is to just tell people like, hey, I'm looking for a job or a 6 month contract or a 12-month contract because that's about the length of time when I'm applying for roles that I know I'll be available in this region and we may be moving somewhere else. So the more you can justify it with a reasonable explanation, but I agree, you're not going to anywhere on your resume say, I'm a military spouse. That's going to go into the cover letter because that's the area where you can use to explain some of these things that are just going to be like standout or questions. But it's if like as soon as you say military spouse in your cover letter, I'm like, okay, now like your job history and like the things that makes a ton of sense. And it may raise the issue of, okay, is this person going to be around in a year if they had to go remote? Would we be able to have a remote position available for the person? Like all of those kinds of things. Much better conversation to have right up front than like you apply for the job and then a week after you're there, you tell them, oh, by the way, I'm a military spouse and we're going to be here in, San Diego for a year, but then might need to move. I would be so pissed as a new like manager of you. I'd be like, why didn't you just tell me this earlier? Like now, like it would have made more sense for us to offer you this other role or for us to do this other thing. I don't know. For whatever it's worth, I like to be transparent whenever I can when I'm applying for positions and encourage people to do the same. That way, you're giving the hiring manager a fair shot to have the full picture, right? Now, for those people that can experience pregnancy, that's not something you're going to put in your cover letter or on your resume. That's just something that we like just deal with as the time comes up. But if it's something about relocation, that's definitely explainable.
Thank you.
Got another question. This is from Vanessa, Mike. She's saying, I'm transitioning from another tech system with positions and experience ranging from technician, developer, manager. How deep and far back should I go on my resume?
10 years, I think, is reasonable. It gives people a good snapshot of a length of time. You could go more if you think it's helpful. Like I've been coding for 30 plus years, almost 40. So that said, I wouldn't want to put 40 years of my experience on there. It's just too much. It's a long slog. But if I looked at the last 4 or 5 positions that I've been in, and those are the most relevant, then that's enough. You're just trying to give them a taste. You don't got to give them the whole shebang, right? Just a taste so they can understand it's worthwhile and that you do have the depth of experience that makes it worth the next conversation. Because keep in mind, the next conversation is actually expensive. Because you got to think about it. If a company is going to bring you in for an interview, they got to have 2 or 3 of their engineers. These engineers, if it's like software engineering, and it's a big company, these engineers might be making like $400,000 a year. So what's an hour of their time worth? It's just a few $100s. So like for them to have a few of the engineers come off the floor and an engineering manager to interview you, they're making an investment just to have that conversation. And internally, the HR folks and the engineering hiring managers, they get really pissy about, man, the people that you're sending our way, they're not the right fit. And they come back and forth. That adds friction. And that's a lot of times the reason why the HR person that's doing the initial screenings, they don't want to waste their time with anybody that they don't think has a decent shot. If you get into an interview, you have a decent shot at getting the role. Unless you're doing something shady where they're just trying to interview a certain number of people so they can check boxes and say that they interviewed a minority or a woman or whatever, right? But the current state of DE&I, I don't think that's the case. I would say for the most part, if you get that interview, like you got a decent shot of getting an offer. It will not happen during the meeting, but if you sell it and you do a really great job, there's a chance that you're going to go to the next phase. In terms of how the resume plays into that is your single most important piece of collateral to just open the door and start having that conversation the way they can know how to reach back out to you. And apologies, I can go for like maybe 4 more minutes and then I gotta go. I gotta drop off my kid to school. So I want to give you a chance to get some last minute questions in though.
Yeah, I got one,
Hmm?
Mike. I'm just trying to pick the brain of hiring manager here. Let's say they advertise for multiple roles in an organization, and you have 2 roles that you feel you can fit in, and you decided to go for one of them, but you were rejected. Maybe they have a stronger candidate, and you decided to apply for the next role. And you put your resume in and you put your application in. What does that tell the hiring manager? Is that posing a negative or positive? I don't know.
No, it's pretty common. But in most cases, when they see the resume come through and they see that you applied for this one position, and usually what they'll do is they'll be like, I don't think they're a good fit for this position. But they might reach out to you and say, hey, we have this other position. If you're open to it, we'd be happy to have a conversation about this particular one. So I wouldn't get too stressed out over apply for the one that you think you're most interested in. Even if it's not the one that you think you're the most aligned with, apply for the one that you're most interested in and don't feel like any kind of way about applying for a second one if there's another one that's also interested. In many of their systems, they'll have a box you can check and it will say, are you open to other positions or are there any other positions that you're interested in? I wouldn't, if they have 5 open positions, I wouldn't submit 5 applications, right? But 2 is like totally reasonable. And then it'll shake out. Different companies have different ways of figuring that out. But when you, like, same thing when you're asking someone for a referral, they make sure you know which job they want you to refer and say, this is the one I'd prefer. I always go preference over where you think you'll be most likely to get picked because there's only this short window that you're not employed. Once you get a job, now you're in that job. And it's going to take a while to transition into another one if you want to go somewhere else. So always go after the ones that you really want to do. What's the one that like, this is where I'd be happy versus the one where it's, I think I can get this one. And then I'll figure out how to move my way around in the company. That's not so easy in some companies, right? Some companies is no, the teams don't like to give up their team members to other teams, and they'll just like, yeah, they'll make it hard. So that like getting a foot in the door and then going to do something else, that's not the strategy that I would use. I would use go after jobs that you're interested, that you feel like you're a good fit for, and that you'd be happy. Don't sacrifice your happiness.
Thank you.